let's dive into unintentionally p-hacking. I want to stress first that I'm going to talk about p-hacking, and I don't want to accuse anybody. So it's about unintentional p-hacking. Quite often it happens not consciously, so that is important to keep in mind. So if we talk about signs of p-hacking, and when we see signs that someone has been p-hacking, it's highly likely that it is unintentional. So let's dive into it. Yeah. Okay. First, I want to start with a scenario. So let's say I have an hypothesis. I want to test that, and I do an experiment, and then I find a significant result. What do you think? Is this convincing evidence that an effect exists? So do one experiment, get a significant result. Is this convincing evidence for you that an effect? Any suggestions about how likely you think how convincing this evidence is?
I think that more experiments should be done and find more evidence.
Yeah. So you think replication is needed?
Yeah.
So let's do that. Let's go back to the scenarios. Now I do 9 experiments. I get an average effect size of 0.22. The p-values you see over here. Is this convincing evidence for you? If I publish this, I publish 9, I come with a paper to you, you are the editor. And these are the results that I present to you. 9 experiments, and I think 11 results, 10 of those are significant. Depends on the power. Ineke, would you mind elaborating on that?
Well, it depends on whether if I have 100% power, then I would say okay, because that's the probability of finding an effect when it's really there. But if you look at the p-values, they're also quite high. They're also, I mean, you would expect if you have a high power that you would have much lower p-values.
Yes.
So I doubt whether you would find this convincing, because there's 2, 4, 5 p-values, 6 p-values between the 0.01 and 0.05.
Yeah, yeah, you are already pointing out the direction that I want to go. If I was, oh, that's nice. That's good. If I would see this, I would immediately reject a paper like this. And it will later on. I will tell why. But it relates to what Ineke just said. First, I will give you some background. What started the increased awareness of the risk of p-hacking? How did for that we have to go back to well, we can go back to 2005. Jon Ioannidis published a paper, why most published research findings are false. It was related to medical results, and he said that, well, as the title claims, most of that published research is false, and that caused a major upstir. It was very controversial. As you can see, it's cited a lot. I have to say, other people think that this claim is false, but what it did, it increased awareness that maybe things are not as well as thought, but over time the warning was faded a bit, and people thought, okay, maybe he was exaggerating a bit, still fine, probably. Then in 2011, we had the case of Diederik Stapel. He was a famous Dutch social psychologist, very influential internationally as well. But in 2011, it turned out that he fabricated most of his results. He had 58 papers that were retracted. So it was bad. It was very bad for social psychology, very bad for psychology. A lot of people thought that well, it was bad for the reputation. As you can see here with the 58 articles that have been retracted. He's on the leaderboard of retraction watch. There are only 2 researchers who have more articles retracted than Diederik Stapel. So he accomplished something with his fraud. But how this case was perceived in the field of psychology was that, yeah, he fabricated data. So he's a bit of a criminal. And although it's very bad, the rest of the researchers are not like that. He is the rotten apple among a big basket of shiny fruit. So this was how we perceived it. And okay, although he was bad, the rest is fine. But a couple of years later, it turned out that everything is not fine. And the realization came when Daryl Bam published his article about extrasensory perception. He's also a psychologist. He published this article in JPSP, the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. It's the top journal for social psychology and personality research. And what he claimed in 9 experiments, that he found convincing evidence for the existence of psi. Being able to predict the future. Parapsychology is where it relates to. The 9 experiments, more than 1,000 participants, effect size of 0.22. You may recognize it from the introduction, the scenario. And he found that the effect of being able to predict the future is strongest for erotic pictures, and women have it more than men. It's clearly nonsense. It's an outrageous claim, but still he was able to publish it in the highest ranking journal of psychology. And this was a very clear warning signal to the field. So a lot of people thought, how is it possible that this is published? And the editors knew that this was very controversial, but they said, yeah, we recognize that or acknowledge that this research is a bit strange or controversial, but the way the paper was presented, the methods, the way of analysis, everything was completely the same as all the other research that we published. So we thought that, okay, we have to do it. So then people thought, okay, if this is publishable, then there is really something wrong with how we do research. If this can be published, it means that the research that the rest of the research that we do may also be false or have serious issues. So people thought, what is going on? Well, probably what is going on is first some more background. So after the Darrow case, people started to scrutinize psychology research even more, and they tried to replicate a lot of the well-known findings. And what they found in a big reproducibility project was that of the 97 studies, only 36 replicated. That were studies that were published in top journals. And if the effects were replicated in the same direction, the effects were much smaller, usually half the size of the original research. And after that, more instances of research that wouldn't replicate popped up. So ego depletion research hardly replicates, and if it does, only with very, very small effects. Spatial feedback hypothesis, social and behavioral priming, gene environment effects for depression, all textbook studies that have huge issues with replicability. So people wondered, so how is this the case? How can we have such a huge body of literature, of research, which all showed significant results, but when we try to replicate it, it doesn't replicate? Well, probably there are more reasons. We have publication bias, etc. But what also probably happened is that people used p-hacking to get their results. And again, probably unintentionally. What is p-hacking? P-hacking is the use of strategies to change an initial non-significant result into a significant result. And how do you do that? Well, there is different labels for that. Some people say performance enhancing designs, use of questionable research practices, Opportunistic research practices, I like that one. Spending research degrees of freedom, or walking the different paths of the garden of forking paths. They all relate to the same thing. People have a lot of choices when they do research. And when you look at the picture over here, the garden of forking paths, it nicely illustrates it. So you have your data, and then you are going to analyze it. But you have a lot of choices, which can bring you to different outcomes. So first you make here a choice, then here, then here, then here, and then here, and you get a non-significant result. But then you are going to think about it. How is it possible? Did I make the right decision? And no, of course not. Let's track back a bit. Maybe the effect was only in men or women. No, let's try that. And then you get almost a significant result, but you're not there. Then you're going to think about it even more. And then you try different solutions or options. And then in the end, where's my cursor? You find your significant result. And this is largely all fine, but the problem is that what happens is that people only report this p-value, the significant one, and do not report on the other paths that they're taking, because obviously that were wrong paths. Now they were wiser. Why report on all the stuff that didn't work? But this is p-hacking. This is trying different solutions until you get your significant result. This increases the risk that you have a false positive. How common is it? People did research on it, John Lewenstein and Prelick in 2012, and they surveyed a lot of researchers. I think this was psychologists. I think it was about 2,000 of them, and they asked them about their questionable research. Of how many of these behaviors did you ever do? And when we look at the table, we see that not reporting all the dependent variables happens a lot. So people test different kind of dependent variables and only keep those that turn out significant. Collect more data after peaking. So that is getting your data, analyze the data, not significant, then run another couple of participants, then check again, and doing that, repeating that just until you get a significant result. You can also do it the other way. Analyze your data somewhere in the process of collecting data and stop as soon as you get your significant result. Not reporting all conditions, that's quite common. We look at the list, only reporting studies that worked, and that's when you read it like here, it's obvious that it is questionable. But when you do an experiment and you don't find the results, you are going to critically evaluate what may have happened, and it is very easy to come up to think about some critical flaw in your experiment, which explains why it's not necessary to report on that. Hacking is quite common. Hacking is hypothesizing after results are known. This means that you just do a lot of analysis, look which results come up significant, and only after that significant result, think of an hypothesis belonging to that, and then writing it up like that. Interesting to note, Daryl Bam, the guy of the article that resulted in so much controversy, he also wrote a very influential textbook on how to do research. And in his book, which was read by many psychology students, I had to read it as well during my master, I think. He advocated for hacking, to explore your data, see what's out there, and only write up the results that are significant, because we are not interested in all your wrong paths that you take. So it's quite common. Falsifying data is luckily quite rare, but still 9% of people that responded to the questionnaire indicated that they falsify the data. It's shockingly high, I think. Other things that you can that influence the outcomes of your research are you going to do a one-sided test or two-sided test? It's fine when you decide on that beforehand, but it is very tempting to do that after you find the results. So first it is not significant, then you think, but I had a directional hypothesis, so I'm now going to test it one-sided, and it is significant. Inclusion of control variables. Which variables are you going to include in your analysis? Think about it beforehand, but afterwards you can include a lot of covariates, and maybe after the inclusion of one of them, you will get a significant result. How are you going to handle outliers? Why are you going to look at that? And if so, are you going to exclude them if participants score 3 standard deviations above the mean, or 2 or 2.5? That's all kind of different decisions that influence the outcome of your analysis. So where can it lead to? All that flexibility in the process of analyzing your data. In 2012, I think it was, Simmons, Nelson, and Simonson made a kind of a parody to show what is possible with enough researcher's degree of freedom. And they showed in a study that listening to the Beatles make you 1.5 years younger compared to listening to another song. How did they do it? In bold, you see what they reported. In lighter gray, you see what they really did. And what this nicely illustrates is all the steps that the research degrees of freedom that people take during research. So changing the sample size. First it was 22, then it was 34. They reported on 2 conditions, listening to When I'm 64 or Kalimba, but in reality there was also a hot potato condition, controlling for all kinds of variables that is not reported, etc., etc. So with not enough freedom, you can just prove anything. But yeah, this is clearly wrong. People would agree that this is not correct. But the problem is, in a lot of our own research, we kind of tend to do the same thing because of our biases. Because in hindsight, we always find an explanation for why it is justifiable to change our analysis or do the steps. But it leaves traces, and that is the main topic of this presentation. You can see when people likely use questionable research practices or p-hack their way to the end result. And I want to show examples of that now. I want to show how to spot that. First, some questions for you. When the null hypothesis is true and you would do many experiments, how would you think that the distribution of p-values look like? Do you have an idea? You can. Yes, that's true. And what about when there is an effect? Do you have an intuition about that? Is it a normal distribution, perhaps? You can think about that. Another thing that it's about intuition. So let's assume that you have extremely low power. I hope you never encounter this kind of situation, but let's say just over 5%. What kind of p-values do you think are more likely? Are you more likely to find a p-value between 0 and 0.01 or between 0.04 and 0.05? Think about this. I will come to that later. So let's see how the distributions look like. The answer was correct. When there is no effect in reality, all p-values are just as likely. So if your alpha is 5%, 5% of your p-values will fall below 0.05. So you will have a risk of 5% of having a false positive. That's the whole definition of the alpha. That's a type 1 error. So now let's see how the distribution looks like when there is an effect. Is it normal distribution? No, it's a very skewed distribution. So what you can see in this graph is here's 0.05. Smaller than this is what we consider significant. Extremely skewed. And when there is sorry, when there is 80% power, 80% of the p-values are smaller than 0.05. But what you also see is that many of the p-values are smaller than 0.01. So when I highlight the area smaller than 0.01, we see that 60% of p-values, around 60% of p-values, are smaller than 0.01 when there is 80% power. And around 21% falls between 0.01 and 0.05. And the 0.01, the range between 0.01 and 0.05, that's what we call the Goldilocks zone. So just right. So when you get there, you can celebrate. You have a significant result. Yes, you are there. And let's see. Yeah. So the example of low power. I've plotted that here as well. I have a situation where it is extremely low power, 5.02. When we look at how many p-values are smaller than 0.01, so between 0 and 0.01, we see that it is 1.01%. Now that's not much, but it is something. And what about smaller than between 0.04 and 0.05? It's smaller than 1%. So even when there is very small, the power is very small, you are more likely to find a p-value between 0.01 of 0 and 0.01 than between 0.04 and 0.05. So what I want to indicate that it is not very likely to find a lot of p-values that are just smaller than 0.05. Never. So to recap how to spot p-hacked studies, when you find a lot of p-values in the Goldilocks zone, so a lot of p-values between 0.01 and 0.05, you do expect p-values in that range, but not the vast majority. And you do expect a lot of p-values that are much smaller than that when there are, and there is really an effect. When there is no effect, you expect a lot of p-values that are not significant, of course. So power. Doesn't power have any influence on the probability that you find p-values just below 0.05? Yes, it has some influence. In this graph over here, I have on the x-axis, I have percentage of power, and on the y-axis, I have the probability of p-values between 0.01 and 0.05. What you can see here is that when your power is between 60 and 65, you have the largest chance, highest chance of getting a p-value in the Goldilocks zone. But it is just below 25%. That is the most optimum situation that you can create to find Goldilocks results. And even then, you will only find that 25% of all your p-values are below or fall in that Goldilocks result. So most of the other p-values will be either larger or even smaller. So there is no situation imaginable where it is very likely that when you do 5 experiments, that all 5 of your p-values are within that Goldilocks zone. So not very likely to find many p-values in that Goldilocks zone. But the amazing thing is, when you dive into the literature, you find it everywhere. You have the BEM study, the p-values that I already shown in the scenario, a very unlikely pattern. Then we look at, and it's not only that you will find this in very low impact journals. You will find it in the highest impact journals imaginable. For example, a couple of years ago, an article published in Science about the psychological consequences of money, and it concluded that money makes people more self-centered. When we look at the results, it's in this table over here, 9 experiments, and almost all of the results are in the Goldilocks zone. It's quite amazing. This person is either very lucky or something else happened. And it is important to stress that just by coincidence, it does happen that almost all effects fall into Goldilocks zone, but that could happen 1 in 1,000 times or something like that. But when you look at the literature, you find it all the time. And you see it everywhere. I've seen it in papers in my own department. Last week, I read a dissertation, and every main outcome in that dissertation that was reported was in the Goldilocks zone. So what that also indicates is that people are not aware that Goldilocks zone results are suspicious, that it is an indication that something probably went wrong. So that's why I think it is very important to create awareness that this is an issue. And again, the Goldilocks results are probably the result of unintentional steps in the analysis that resulted in that Goldilocks zone results. So in unintentional p-hacking. So to sum up, I have a couple of graphs. If there is no effect, you would expect a flat line in p-values. The percentages reported over here relate to the percentage of significant findings. So of all significant findings, you would expect 20% to be between 0.04 and 5, etc. When you have low power, the distribution looks a bit like this. It's much flatter. If it is like this, when you have high power, it should look like this. When you find this, then the reason to celebrate and to have confidence in the reported results. If you would find a result that looks like this, with increasing number of p-values that fall between 0.02 and 0.05, you can be likely that it is very likely that something happened. So probably p-hacking. Yeah. So what I showed now is that you purely based on eyeballing, you can get an indication of, well, something is probably wrong. People have designed tools to more formally test this kind of stuff. I'm not going to go into that. You can check it out yourself. It's p-curve, for example, and z-curve are related approaches. They have apps, and the funny thing is you can just try it on yourself. You can enter research in a paper, but you can also enter the results of your own research. You can enter the results of whole fields in there and make curves and see how the distribution of p-values looks like. No, wrong one. So most important thing maybe is, what can you do to protect yourself from unintentional p-hacking? I think one of the most important things is to think about the power that you need in your study beforehand, instead of in hindsight concluding that, well, your power may have not been sufficient. If you think about power beforehand, you can determine an effect size, and then you can sample enough people that you are likely to find an effect when it is really there. So then there is no need for p-hacking. Another thing you can do that relates to the power analysis is thinking about a smallest effect size of interest. So before you are going to run the study, which effect size do you think is minimally needed to be relevant? And why this helps is that if you set a minimum effect size of interest, if you get your results, you don't have to even run statistics. If it is below your smallest effect size of interest, you are not going to interpret it anyway. So it doesn't matter whether it is significant or not. You say, oh, it's smaller than what I was interested in. So you base your conclusions on the effect size instead of the p-value. Other things you can do is trying to limit the research degrees of freedom that you have. And how can you do that? For example, by doing a pre-registration. So in a pre-registration, you before you conduct your study, you write down your hypothesis, your plan of analysis, very detailed, all the steps that you are going to do, and then you publish them alongside your manuscript, and it has the advantage that you already planned your steps, that people can see what your plans were, and can see, okay, the deviation, you may deviate. People can judge whether this is probably the result of some bias or hindsight bias. It was really a good idea to change your analysis. So then you are much likely or much less tempted to try out a lot of different things and then go with the one that is significant. There will be a workshop about that, so we'll skip this. Yeah, another thing that you can do is doing a registered report. It relates to pre-registrations. It's kind of the bit of the holy grail. It's a different way of publishing. And it works like this: you design your study, you write it up, your whole design, your hypothesis, your planned analysis, and that's what you will send out for review to a journal. The journal will then review your hypothesis, your plan of analysis, and you will get feedback on that part. When they approve your methods and your analysis, it can be accepted before you even you get a provisional acceptance. So it will be accepted no matter what the outcomes of your study are, whether it is significant or not. So in the next phase, you will collect your data and analyze your data, write up the results, and then send it back to the journal again. And they will evaluate whether you followed the steps that you previously specified. And if not, if deviations are indeed justifiable, whether they really made sense. So that's a very nice way of decreasing publication bias, decreasing the risk of p-hacking, of spending research degrees of freedom. So I hope that a lot more people are going to make use of this format. Another way of protecting yourself from p-hacking is, ironically, p-hack the hell out of your results by doing every analysis that seems justifiable. So that's called multiverse analysis. And you can do that in situations that you have multiple predictors of multiple outcomes. So when you do genetic research, for example, looking at multiple SNPs, when you have, for example, a depression study about the effects of a medication on depression, you have multiple assessments of depression or measured in different way, diagnosis by a clinician, but also self-reports. Look at all the different ways you could possibly analyze your data, all the different choices that you could be made and are justifiable. Just run all of them. But the important thing is also report all of them. And when you do that, you can see how robust the results are. You will find significant results, insignificant results. You can get the bigger picture. It's kind of a robustness check. An example is the study of Vera Heiniger. I know Ineke Wessel is also working on multiverse analysis, I believe. It's a very nice way of protecting yourself, of selectively reporting on some of the analysis. We will organize a workshop about this as well. It's not on the agenda yet, but it will come. Yeah, why should we try to minimize the risk of p-hacking? Of course, because it increases the number of true findings, because it improves science, because also I think we owe it to our funders, to the society and our participants to do the best research we can. And if we p-hack, the chances of false positives increase. The chances that we model the research, the database increases. So we shouldn't do it. But maybe you are less convinced about these higher goals in science, etc. But there are also other motives or reasons why you should think about trying to minimize the risk of p-hacking. And that relates to how science communication has changed in the past 10 years. So in the past, well, I think 100 years, research was spread exclusively via journals. You had to send in a journal, an article to a journal, it was published, and if you wanted to comment on that, you had to write a letter to the editor, then you had to wait whether or see whether that was accepted, etc. That's changes now. It changes now. Research is discussed via social media a lot, via Twitter, Facebook, or via blogs. And at the same time, awareness increases about the risk of p-hacking. So people become aware that a lot of p-values in that Goldilocks zone may be a bit suspicious. You may like it or not, but what happens a lot is that people share their criticism on social media. So you may proudly post your study on social media, or maybe even not, but you may be very proud that your article is published. But if it contains a lot of Goldilocks results, it may be that some influential social media user picks it up. An example over here about a new paper, and what is reported. Well, interestingly, all significant p-values are in the Goldilocks zone. But you run the risk of going viral with your paper, but not in the positive way, but in a negative way. And you may disagree with criticizing people's research on Twitter or social media, but it happens. So why not protect yourself against it and at the same time improve doing the way we do science? So yeah, that brings me almost to the conclusion of this talk. P-hacking is extremely easily done. We are great in fooling ourselves in why the decision that we make that results in a significant finding is justifiable and sensible. Most often, therefore, happens unintentionally, but it leaves trails that we can pick up. Many p-values between 0.01 and 0.05 are suspicious. You can protect yourself against unintentional p-hacking by pre-registering your research, doing multiverse analysis, and by doing so, you improve science, but you also improve your career perspectives because you will publish more reliable research. Yeah, that concludes this presentation. I want to bring to your attention the upcoming workshops that we will organize. The 14th of May, there will be a workshop about the basics of GitHub. The week after, it's about pre-registration and registered reports. And in June, we will have a workshop about transparently visualizing your data. All very to be recommended to join. Yeah, and with that, I want to thank you for your attention. Are there any questions? I think it becomes less difficult to reject a paper based on that, because I think people should become more aware of the risks of p-hacking. So people really should take the measures to protect themselves against it. So when you do not pre-register your study, for example, or do not do multiverse analysis, you almost consciously make the decision that you make yourself vulnerable to p-hacking. So nowadays, I would say, okay, you did take the risk of exposing yourselves to p-hacking, making yourself vulnerable to that. The end result is that you have a lot of p-values in the Goldilocks zone. I'm going to reject it. And if you could have helped yourself by pre-registering your results, then you could have had Goldilocks results as well. But then you add that protection of the pre-registration. It doesn't protect you completely, because you still have to be very specific. If your pre-registration is very vague, then there are still a lot of research degrees of freedom. But yeah, I would say I would suggest replication, for example. If I wouldn't accept it.
That would be grounds enough for rejection, because there's always this distinction between confirmatory and exploratory analysis. You might as well say, okay, be transparent about what you did. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Don't overinterpret. Don't overinterpret. But would it be grounds to reject the paper? Because then it would be so that then research done that would end up in a file drawer, and that's also not good. That's sort of a dilemma, isn't it?
I think it is. I think it is a dilemma. But at the same time, chances of a lot of p values in the Goldilocks zone are below 0.05, so it's below alpha, and we are very happy to reject hypotheses based on that. So maybe we should also be willing to reject the idea that it came about without p-hacking.
Yeah, but still, data are data. So you could say, okay, show me everything you did, show me your data, and this should be part of the literature, and remove the p-hacking, for example.
Yeah, but that's difficult to do, of course, remove the p-hacking, because they will argue that they didn't p-hack. So the thing is, you can't really accuse them of p-hacking, because you don't know whether it is p-hacking or not. It can be that they were the lucky ones. But at the same time, you can conclude that there is so much uncertainty that you do not feel comfortable to publish it. I think sharing data is, if they are willing to do so, that they will help, because you can redo your analysis and you can come to your own conclusion. But I advised against publishing an article once that showed too many p-values in the Goldilocks zone.
How was that received by the editor?
Well, it was not. I was not really the reviewer, but someone else was the reviewer and handed it over to me and said, "Okay, what we could do." And based on my comments, it was rejected, because the pattern was too clear that it was likely coming from p-hacking. Yeah, I think it's up to the researcher to show that their research is reliable and can be reasonably trusted. And if you report a lot of results that look suspicious, or are an indication that something is likely wrong, then it's up to them to make a case why we should publish it. And
that's interesting, because that's the other way around, as it is in the law system, right? There you're innocent until proven guilty. And now and what you're saying is, okay, the burden of the evidence is on the researcher to show that they're not guilty.
It does not relate exactly to, well, directly to the accusation of p-hacking. I think it's just in general, you should be, when you send in a paper, it should be convincing, the whole package, right?
Right.
And that relates to the literature, your theory, your hypothesis, and your results. And if some of those things are not very convincing, well, yeah, it's up to them to convince that it is indeed convincing. And how can you do that? Yeah, by sharing your syntaxes, data, sharing your data, pre-registration, etc. But it remains a very difficult topic. But yeah, sometimes, yeah, if it looks like a duck, it sounds like a duck. Maybe it is a duck, and I would be willing to go with that.
Okay, thanks.
Other comments, questions, people that do not agree? Not sure whether I can directly recommend a paper, but I agree that correction for multiple testing is not done often enough. And when people would do that, p-hacking becomes way more difficult. It's still possible when you only report 1 or 2 results, for example. There are also degrees of freedom in correcting for multiple testing, but it makes it much more difficult. And indeed, if you look at the p-values that you often find in papers, if you would correct as you should for multiple testing, then many of them would result in non-significant p-values. And actually, that's thinking back to it, that's one way I resolved the issue of accusing people of p-hacking. I just said correct for multiple testing, and then your results will be non-significant. There's not a reason to reject the manuscript, of course, but it changes the conclusion. And then, so yeah, correcting for multiple testing is a major issue that has to be done much more. And that's why people are not aware how large the risk of false positives becomes when you do not test for that, for example. Yeah, so yeah, that would resolve a lot.
Okay.
I agree with that. But then, yeah, then there are the different methods to do it. Do you do a simple Bonferroni test or a false discovery rate?
Yeah, and I think you have the same problem if you do it afterwards. Then you can just choose a method that would not adjust your p-value too much, so you can still say it's significant. Well, you just chose a method to correct it afterwards. So
yeah, that's true. I had it in one of my own papers. I had a pre-registration, but I forgot to mention that I was going to correct for multiple testing. I corrected for multiple testing, but of course then you have options. Bonferroni, the more conservative one, or for example, the false discovery rate. And I just explained it. I just would choose for this, but it is a research degree of freedom. Do with this information whatever you want. So yeah, also important to be transparent about that, and you could also think about doing it in multiple ways, showing how robust your results are against different methods of correcting for multiple testing.
Okay. So did I understand correctly that you could just use more p adjustment methods and report them in your paper to show that the results are robust against them? Or?
Yeah, if it's very difficult to determine which of the methods is best or preferable, then and if it really makes a difference, yeah, then you can think about doing that.
Okay. Thanks.
Yep. I'm glad that you liked the talk. I think that we can wrap up. All the slides are already on my Open Science over my OSF account. It's the link I will post here. The video will be posted there as well. You feel free to to share it. If you have questions after this presentation, you can always email me or contact me via Twitter. Yeah, and I want to thank you for your presence. And I hope to see you all at our next workshops. All right. Bye-bye.